Hello, this is Summit to Talk About, your one-stop podcast for all things hiking, hills, wild camping and the great outdoors. It is fantastic to be back for Series 5 of the podcast and exciting to be able to announce that we can now bring you even closer to the podcast as you have the option to watch the full episode on video or the usual audio content wherever you get your podcasts. Throughout the summer, Claire and I have been out and about meeting up with people face to face to bring you content for Series 5, and we're really excited to share it with you. A big shout out to Hiker. Hiker is the best app for planning and executing your outdoors adventures wherever that might be in the world. With over 25,000 preloaded trails in the app, there's plenty to choose from all over the planet, and you can create your own using some of the fantastic tools that are built inside the app. You should go and check it out now. The app is free to download and you can upgrade to Hiker Pro Plus with 20% off by clicking the link in the show notes. I'd also like to thank Zoleo, who have kindly lent me one of their satellite communication devices. If you're like me, you'll often find that you have no signal whilst you're out in the hills and the mountains just when you need it. It offers that peace of mind so that I can contact my friends and my family whenever I need to via the very easy to use app that's on the mobile device. So as long as you've got your battery, you'll be fine. So what it does is it offers that familiar texting service. So very much like using your normal text messaging service or WhatsApp, for example. It's very easy to use. You can send messages to whoever you need to. You can send updates about whereabouts you are with a pinpoint location, and it has the SOS function on there as well, so that if you are in any trouble you can hit the SOS button and it will send help as soon as possible. The Zoleo uses the Iridium satellite network, which means that it will always have some kind of connectivity, and if it doesn't need to use that, it can use your own network or it can use Wi-Fi as well. Now, Zoleo have kindly offered me a code for anybody who wants to get their own Zoleo device for that peace of mind. If you use the code RyanXZoleo, that will get you free Zoleo device activation. So check out the link in the show notes, and I've also got a video on that on YouTube, so please go and check it out, my initial thoughts of the Zoleo device. In this episode we met with Alex Staniforth. Alex is a force of nature and has raised loads and loads of money for the charity which he founded, Mind Over Mountains. Now, Alex has done many things in his short life so far, including 2 trips to Mount Everest, which he talks about in great detail. Unfortunately, both those trips not being the success that he had hoped for, but I'm sure the story will tell itself as to the reasons why that happened. Recently as well, Alex has suffered with long COVID and he's battled through that. And he's recently come out the other side of that and attempted what we call the Frog Graham Round, which he has now completed, I'd like to add. So he talks about that and talks about all the other adventures that he has had during his lifetime. And I really hope you enjoy. Today I am joined by Alex Staniforth. We're up here in his own house in Kendal, just outside the Lake District. First of all, thank you very much for inviting us and for giving us your time, because this is it's obviously new to get out and start seeing people, and so we really appreciate you giving up your time and allowing us to come into your home. So welcome onto our podcast, first of all.
It's great to be here, and I can talk about adventure all day, every day, so it's a pleasure, and thank you for having me on. I hope something I say and share today will be helpful for people as well.
Yeah, I think so, and from what I've read about you and from following you on social media as well, I think that your life, albeit short so far, has been full of adventure, and we're still, early days, aren't we, I'd say, for yourself?
I hope so. I hope that the best is yet to come. People often say to me, I've done so much in such a short time, and what's next? And I guess my challenge is sustaining that, because keeping that pace, and sometimes life has to slow down, but I really hope that this is just the start. The challenge is trying to maintain that.
Yeah, I think it's important actually, because even just what you've just mentioned there is people asking you what's next. Do you sometimes feel that as pressure? Do you feel like you have to keep providing people with the content, i.e. I've got to get another adventure in because people are asking for it?
You have to keep on providing the goods, the entertainment. Yeah, Inevitably, there is a pressure, but I think it's more of an internal pressure, and I find that after a period of time, might be a year or 2 years, there's kind of an itch that I can't quite get rid of, and there's generally something missing in life. I just feel it. It's that intuition that I need something big and exciting just to change the pace a bit.
Yeah.
Just to create some new energy and new stories and new content and just new life lessons.
Yeah.
And often the answer to that is planning a big adventure. For example, I've not done anything big now for about, big in my terms for about 3 years. And there's definitely a void there. So I've done lots of little mini adventures and endurance stuff in the meantime, but it's not quite hitting the spot. But inevitably, it's like you get known for something, and it's like, certain celebrities and musicians, they get known for one line or one song and they get asked to play it every time they go somewhere. And it's just like, if you're gonna get known for something, then you've got to own it. You've got to enjoy it. And I do find, and it's maybe true or just a perception, that I kind of not adding any value unless I'm doing these things. But you've got to be in the right mindset. You've got to be in the right place in life. You've got to have the right circumstances to be able to commit yourself to an adventure. And afterwards, it's really important having that downtime just to reflect and just to enjoy not having to do anything for a while. So it's a pressure, but it's mostly internal, and people mean well. People genuinely enjoy following this stuff. And so when I don't have something, I kind of feel like I'm just a bit a fly on the wall, really.
Yeah. So let's go back then, because I've already mentioned that you're quite young. In the grand scheme of things, you've got a long way to go. Where did it all begin for you? Because it's always important for me to find out how do people, particularly people like you, who, in my eyes, have been very, very successful in the outdoors industry, in the world of the outdoors and adventure. How did that start for you?
Interesting. It's interesting because we all perceive ourselves differently, and I don't see myself kind of successful in any way yet. There's so much more I need to do. But I guess from where I started to how I've got to here, at least I can say, it all started really when I was about, I think. So I was brought up in Chester. I wasn't born in the Lakes. I've been here for about 4 years now. And I was never your typical adventurer. It wasn't like something that was instilled in me. My family spent a lot of time in the caravan in Wales and a lot of travelling. And I lived near a forest. So from a young age, I was always connected with nature, but not to the kind of the same extremes that I use it now. Now it's a way to challenge myself. Before it was just kind of something I did. But I had a few challenges through school, like we all did. But for me, it was mostly having epilepsy when I was 9.
Okay.
It was a really kind of unsettling thing. That was soon brought under control, but it was just a catalyst for a whole host of different things to deal with at such a young age. So I've had a stammer all my life, which I've never really known life without that. Badly bullied through school, which kind of didn't help with confidence, and anxiety and panic attacks, triggered by the epilepsy and I guess a general health anxiety. So I guess I remember even when I was fairly young, having a seizure in McDonald's for many years. Just the smell of fast food could then trigger a panic attack.
Oh, right, okay.
So I felt constantly under threat. The world was a really threatening place, and I thought that I was a victim. I thought that I was never really good enough. I was looking for that thing, that belonging, that purpose, and never really found it. Until I was about 14, and my friend Tom and his family invited me on a hill walking weekend in the Lakes. Something they did as a family, something I'd never really done. And I said yes. I went on that weekend, and I remember even going for a meal out. I was in a nervous wreck. I thought I was going to have a panic attack.
Yeah.
Yet we'd been in the hills that day, and it'd been the exact opposite. Because I remember us walking near Blencathra on Suter Fell, and in the mountains for the first time just blew my mind. I mean, I'd never seen anything like it before. I've been brought up in a lovely part of the world, quite rural, but this was like a whole new level. I just became captivated by the idea of climbing big mountains. And at some point that day, the idea of climbing Everest popped into my mind. Triggered this kind of curiosity, and at 14, you think you can take on the world.
Yeah.
So I went home, I started researching it, and I remember just this connection with the Lake District started, and I've had that ever since. That's why I moved here.
Yeah.
And after reading about Everest and reading mere mortals who climbed it, it was like, that's who I want to be. I have to be that person. That was a way of overcoming the bullying, the self-doubt, and proving myself and proving the bullies wrong, really.
Yeah.
And I kind of decided at 14 I was going to stand on top of the world. And so with that in mind, that was what triggered this kind of passion for the outdoors. And then it was a case of finding other challenges. What else could I do? So I'd done hill walking, and then it was mountain biking and rock climbing and scuba diving and paragliding and just this whole range of stuff. I think that's when I really found my path in life. And then there's a few other things happen in the same sort of time. So I was an only child, so my parents weren't particularly outdoorsy. My dad was a marathon runner. And we went on holiday to France with my dad and my stepmom. And my stepmom put a €2 bet that I couldn't run a mile with my dad. Now, I should say that I was really unfit at school. I despised exercise. I mean, I was the kid that came last in cross country in year 7. But I wanted that €2. It's a lot of money when you're 13.
Yeah.
And I dragged myself around, and it was those things that just gave me that sense of achievement, and I realised that I wanted the next fix. And so it was just a few mindset shifts, really.
Wow. So how much could you have earned if you'd have run 26 miles?
I don't know.
What a great holiday that would have been.
It would have, but the irony is now I beat my dad's marathon PB, so that's all that matters. But he did beat me a part run a few weeks ago, so it's it all comes around.
So the challenge continues. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my PBs are safe for a while.
Yeah.
But my dad was my inspiration, and he got me into running and has supported me ever since.
Yeah. That was going to be one of my questions for you. Like, who is your inspiration for the outdoors world? And is it still your dad now?
Dad's definitely one of them. Dad got me into running, and he'd done the 3 Peaks, which became my first kind of big challenge that I ever did when I was 16. And there's been a lot of them have been related to Everest. So when I had this Everest goal, the first step really was reaching out to other young Everest climbers and role models, and essentially, how could I follow in their footsteps? And to be fair, there's not many young Everest climbers. At the time, there was literally about 3 or 4 kind of English ones.
Yeah.
Who had a very similar background to me. What was great was that they were just like me. What stood them out was their commitment. That Everest had become their full-time job because it had to be. And they were the proof that I could do this, that I could achieve the same thing if I was willing to follow the same process. So coming across them was massively, that's what changed everything, because suddenly it started to feel possible.
Yeah.
Tim, who became my Everest guide both years, was a big inspiration as well, because naturally he was that window to achieving this thing. And there's many others at different stages of life, but I think another one I think was Bear Grylls, which I know he's a big name and it sounds like a fangirl thing. But when I was injured, and so when I was about 16, I suddenly got injured. I couldn't run, I couldn't climb or cycle for like the best part of a year. And all of a sudden, having discovered this outdoor thing, it was then taken away from me, and I couldn't cope with that. I thought, I was safe. I was clear of all the bad stuff now. And in that time, not being able to pursue this goal and losing that coping mechanism and all the depression and eating disorder and everything that came along with that, a good friend of mine, Rich, gave me the book by Bear Grylls, Mud, Sweat and Tears.
Yeah.
And it was just reading that story of how he broke his back in a parachuting accident and then climbed Everest 18 months later at 23, having had to learn to walk again.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, if he can overcome that, then I can overcome this. And that was the inspiration to actually change this kind of dream into a goal by setting the date.
Yeah.
And it all kind of came together, and I was like, I can't stay here. I can't just wait. And I remember an orthopedic consultant at the time telling me, like, you might just not ever be able to run properly again. It might just be that you've got something wrong with you and you can't run properly.
Yeah. And I bet that stuck with you more than any of the positive things that was to come with it.
At the time, it absolutely floored me. But at the same time, it was kind of like a flashback to all the bullying. And it's a bit like, right then, I'll show you.
Yeah. Oh, right.
Not in a negative way. He was just doing his job, and I respect that. But I've had a similar thing recently, happen again when I had when I had a cardiologist kind of saying to me, you might never get back to where you were again. And it's like, I can't wait. I've got to find out, And what Bear inspired me to do was to set the date. So basically I said, right, 2014, I want to climb Everest. At this point, I didn't know whether I was going to run or train properly again. I was 17. I had 18 months to try and raise about 40 grand to fund the trip and to finish my A-levels, So it's probably doesn't make much sense, but I just knew that's what I had to do.
Yeah. And how was that? So you've gone from 14-year-old boy who's gone for a walk in the Lake District and thinking, I really fancy going up Everest, to getting to Everest. How did that period in between, so how did the training come about at such a young age with your A-levels and things like that? How did you manage all of that?
So I guess it was a very busy 4 years. I had a crammed lot into that, and I guess that was partly the reason for setting this kind of deadline, where some people say, why not wait to, put a lifetime of mountaineering behind you? And that obviously is the most common sense thing. People say, what's a rush? Why don't you just wait? And generally, most people will approach Everest after decades and decades of experience. I'm not undermining that at all. I just was in a position that I was able to do a lot. I didn't have, a full-time job. I was still a student. And I was willing to take anything steps I needed, you know. And I went rock climbing for the first time with Tim Mosdale, who would become my guide both years. I mean, he climbed Everest 6 times, so I was in very good hands.
Yeah.
I liked his ethos, very safe, very pragmatic, and very focused on being an independent mountaineer. Tim always said, it doesn't matter how good your support team is in the death zone, you're the only one who can put one foot in front of the other. Yeah. And so he essentially held up the hoops and I had to jump through them. So first step was climbing in the Alps. It was Mont Blanc when I was 17. Going to Nepal for a month to try and climb a 6,000 metre and a 7,000 metre peak called Burunsi a year later. Right. And obviously all the fitness training in between, but you realise that the fitness doesn't really do much for you. It's about time at altitude, getting to know your body and how it responds. Yeah. So that was what I did. And would I have done more in hindsight? Yes, but I don't feel like I was making myself a liability. I felt that I had enough to take care of myself. And the right team around me. On Everest you can cut corners and they're the people that get killed.
That's it, yeah.
Because they don't have the support, the Sherpas, the oxygen, and that kind of guiding leadership. So it was just a very, very busy 4 years, and after I finished my A-levels, and pretty much whilst I was doing my A-levels, trying to raise the money for corporate sponsorship was a full-time job, day in and day out, to the early hours of the morning, sending emails to thousands of companies, trying to get them to believe in this kid with a dream, and I think because of that, because I was just like a normal kid, I didn't have parents just to sign me a check. I was washing pots in my local pub at weekends. That wasn't going to pay for it. A lot of people really want to get behind the underdog, and they see this kid with this massive dream and they wanted to help that become a reality. And fortunately, I got the support I needed, but there was never any guarantee of success. This all could have been for nothing. I could have spent a year and a half and then I could have missed out. But you just have to trust the process, and somehow it comes together in just the last minute, which 4 weeks before was when I got that final big chunk of sponsorship. Wow. So I'm very grateful to them for making that happen. Yeah. But that was it, 4 years. And to be honest, when I was there, it kind of felt, it's like, wow, I'm really here. What? It just felt surreal. It really did.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, even just seeing the Himalayas is breathtaking enough. And then to think that you're stood at the foot of Everest and you are about to go up beyond base camp, which is, a lot of people go to base camp, but you're going beyond and you're going into the Khumbu Icefall, etc., etc. So let's talk about your first Everest expedition, 2014. Yeah. Let's go into that because there's obviously, I'll say first expedition, and we'll come on to the second one in a second. But let's talk about the first one.
Well, it's funny you mention around going into the Icefall because that year we didn't even leave base camp. So a day before we got there, there was a big massive avalanche in the Icefall. Big Surat came off and sadly killed 16 Sherpas below. They were in the worst possible place at the worst possible time and the biggest disaster in Everest history at the time. So with that in mind, things went pretty nasty pretty quickly. There was a lot of politics and strikes and threats and things, and it just was a really sad situation. So we had to pack up and go home. We didn't even get to start climbing because it just wouldn't have been appropriate to do so. Yeah. So we went back, and obviously you're back home thinking, right, okay, that wasn't meant to happen. What do we do now? You think that the harder you work, the luckier you'll get. And I guess at 18, I was naive to think, I've done all the hard work now. Yeah. Then you get a real poignant lesson of the mountains that they don't give a damn how much you spent or how hard you've worked. That is the point of adventure. Yeah. So you just have to, there's no point blaming anybody. There's no point whinging about it. You've just got to find the opportunity. So I had another year to go home, to train harder, to come back stronger, and took another year out doing more training, more endurance stuff, because you realise really it's probably 90% mental, only 10% physical.
Yeah.
And went back 2015 for a second attempt. Having got the money together again, and in hindsight, probably came back in a lot better state of mind and body than I was the first time, which is good.
Yeah.
And then obviously 2015, you think, well, surely can't happen twice. But yeah, we were heading up to Camp 1 for the first time. We left base camp in the early hours of the 25th of April. And we were just below Camp 1 when the earthquake hit Nepal. So yeah, all I can remember really is just this sound of ice breaking off the mountain. And then behind that, you've got this distant avalanche coming straight for us. And yeah, for the first time in my life at 19, thinking that's it.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do but stand and take it.
And so, where you were then, just below Camp 1, what sort of devastation was there at that particular point? Did you have to take cover? Was you sort of unscathed, or?
There was nowhere to take cover because we were in the Western Cwm, which is this massive valley. It's called the Valley of Silence for that reason.
Yeah.
You're surrounded by like 7,000 meter peaks on both sides. Where I was just out of the more technical part, so it's like basically just big blocks of ice, and not kind of so much the kind of all the crevasses that I'd passed before, but just in this big open valley, and half an hour away from probably Camp 1, so it was quite flat at this point. So you're very exposed. There's no cover. Whereas further down, you're kind of winding your way through big blocks and house-sized blocks of ice and ladders and everything. It's quite a cool place to be. I'm glad I wasn't there when the avalanche hit, because being on a ladder above like a crevasse hundreds of meters deep wouldn't have been the place to be. But initially, because the fog was so thick, you kind of hear this noise and you assume there's something happening, but you're not quite sure what. I remember this kind of strange kind of calm, after a while, assuming that it had fallen behind me, But initially, I just set off as fast as I could. It was like panic setting. Right, I've got to get out of here quick. And as I said, there was this strange kind of calm came over me after a while, because I kind of assumed it must have fallen behind me because it should have hit me by now. And then all of a sudden, this big cloud of white just hit me from all sides, and it was just like being shot in the face by a big snow cannon. This deafening blast of wind, this white everywhere, just knocking me off my feet. And in those things, you can only assume the worst. You think of what happened the year before. You put two and two together and think, oh no, it's me. And that kind of sickening fear, like properly in the pit of your stomach. And that it could have been seconds or milliseconds, but it's just that realization that any second now it's just going to go black.
Wow.
And it all happens in that kind of microcosm of time, and that genuine fear of like, oh, right, this is it.
Yeah.
Because you just feel this white around you. And then I guess time kind of, freezes. You don't know how long it really is, but all I remember then is that the snow dropping to the ground, and it's kind of this, everything just goes silent again. Yeah. I opened my eyes again. I kind of got back up. And we'd just been hit by this big blast of powder. So the debris, the ice that you think is going to bury you, never came. So basically, we'd just been kind of caught the edge of it. So all the wind had displaced the snow, and it was just there was nothing really solid there. But again, you assume the worst. You go into survival mode, and straight away I got on the radio, no response. So I think, right, because at this point, Tim and a teammate were about 10-15 minutes behind me. I was completely on my own at the point because I'd been so slow that day. I'd been right at the back of the team. Most of the team were already at Camp 1 by this point when it hit. So they were further up the valley. I couldn't see them. I said I couldn't see more than a few hundred meters away. So I just straight away assumed that, Tim was gone. No response on the radios at all. It's like, is Camp 1 going to be there?
Yeah.
but you just have to get yourself to safety. Got to Camp 1 eventually, and actually there was a few tents which had just been flattened, but luckily all the others emerged and everybody was unhurt, which was like a relief. Everybody at Camp 1 was pretty much unharmed.
Yeah.
But we're now trapped at sort of 6,000 meters for 2 days, not knowing how long we're going to be there, not knowing as well that actually we've been in the safest place of all. You know, base camp had just been...
It was devastated, wasn't it? Yeah.
Like a plane crash. It's gone.
And so the Cumber Icefall at this point was behind you.
Pretty much, yeah.
And you were heading up. So was you going to head up anyway, regardless? So this happened. This avalanche had nearly taken you out completely. And then did you at that point think, should I go back down or should I carry on to Camp 1?
At that point, I was so close to Camp 1, I had to get to Camp 1.
Yeah.
And all the support and the supplies were there. That was the only safe place you could be in this situation. As it happens, the route down had been kind of pulled out anyway, so I didn't really have. I know at the time there wasn't an option to do that, and obviously it wasn't safe because you got aftershocks and all those things. So yeah, there was no hesitation. I had to get to Camp 1, and we did think about going to Camp 2 purely because there's more supplies there. That was the only reason for going up the mountain. But any thought about carrying on at this point was obviously gone. As you expect.
Yeah.
You know, so that was that was that.
And so you headed back. So you were up at Camp 1 for 2 days.
2 days before we got flown down by helicopter.
Yeah.
At first we were told it could be a week. You know, obviously we were just a tiny part in this global disaster. You know, and 9,000 people in Nepal had died. You know, so actually we were quite safe and happy up there. We didn't realise that base camp was like a bomb blast, you know, and the priority was helping the injured people down there. 22 people had sadly died. You know, we didn't really know or understand, but when we got on the radio, you know, Henry just said it's chaos, everything's gone. We're all like, how's it gone? It's base camp, how's it gone?
Yeah.
And you just can't comprehend that level of destruction. But we just got told to sit tight. You know, we've got food for a couple of days, so we just had to ration everything. Every half an hour, you got aftershocks and avalanches hitting us from both sides. And yeah, all we can do is sit there and wait.
Wow. And to do that at such a young age as well. And I suppose that leads on really to some of the other things that we're going to talk about, I hope, in terms of the charity and your sort of ethos and mindset now. I suppose a lot of that has probably been built upon that, I guess, I would think, in the same way that, you know, our childhood experiences sort of have an effect later on in life. So unfortunately you didn't summit Everest on both those occasions, not your fault. Is this still unfinished business for you?
I guess I'd say to everybody they'll have to get my books and find out, and I'm joking. I mean, for a long time I said, you know, maybe one day, not yet. I'm too young to say never. Clearly there was a drive to get me there in the first place. But life changes, goals change, values change, and the vision to get me there kind of, you know, faded away. You know, the call just wasn't there. Not so much fear. You know, it's not like I'm afraid of what happened. What happened was a fluke. Life, we're all on borrowed time. You know, if we'd been at base camp, I wouldn't be here, most likely. So you think about the whole perception of risk is it's going to get us eventually. So it's not a case of worrying about what can happen again. As much as my mum thinks that way, it's just a case of the purpose and the reason behind it isn't there anymore. But interestingly, in the last couple of years, in the last year alone, I've really started to reflect on that, and I'm thinking about when and if I'll go back. I think it is when, but you've got to want it, 100%.
Yeah. And
back then, I still lived at home. I didn't have the commitments and now I'm self-employed, so I can't be away for 2 months as easily, and the opportunity isn't. I'd have to go back for the right reasons. So Everest has changed a lot in recent years, which is really sad to see, and I want to make sure that magic is still there. I can still feel it.
Yeah.
But I'd go back for me this time. I'm not trying to prove anything anymore.
Yeah. That's good. Well, there we go. So that's
still
tuned on the cards. So yeah, keep tuned, stay tuned. You never know. Watch this space. So when you came back from Everest then, still young, 18 years old, what was your plan then? Because you've come a long way in less than 10 years from that point onwards. So bring us up to date with what's happened, because you have made the outdoors your life. And how has that happened?
I think the outdoors chose me. I think the initial response, I guess at 19, is you can't really deal with anything like this. You're not trained. The school doesn't teach you this stuff, right? But initially there was this massive kind of loss of identity, loss of purpose. There was a big depression again, because I'd like lost this focus. I'd had this guilt, of like, why them? Why not me? And after a bit of kind of probably post-traumatic stress I didn't really deal with at the time, I just had to find the opportunity. Like, how do I turn this into something positive? As the Sherpas are the most resilient people, because they always look for the opportunity. They always make the best of what they have.
Yeah.
So quite quickly it was, right, I have an obligation to tell the story. I have an obligation to do something for the Sherpas. So started to write my first book, Icefall, which kind of talks about both these trips and the journey to get there. Which was endorsed by Bear Grylls, which I was chuffed a bit about.
We saw that.
Like properly fangirling. And then doing more challenges. It's like, okay, if not Everest, what can I do close to home? One of the first things I did was actually Everest Thing, which is basically cycling the height of Everest on a bike in 24 hours. So I thought, well, sod this. If I can't climb it, I'm going to cycle it. Again, raising money for the people in Nepal. Unknowingly, that kind of catapulted me into a speaking career, because suddenly you've got quite a unique story. I'd already started to do a little bit before this, but actually now the opportunity and demand kind of probably even more so. Because let's face it, there's lots of people who've climbed Everest who are speaking about it, and their experiences are still very valid. But how do you talk to people about what happens when things don't go to plan?
Yeah.
Which is now what I focus on, resilience and overcoming failure. So you think Everest is like the be all and end all, but actually it was just the beginning. And I guess what happened then was about finding a new purpose in life, and that was more about helping other people.
Yeah.
More about how do I use this experience to help other people to deal with their challenges in life, and through speaking, through writing, and now doing more challenges. On the adventure side, initially it took, it's always hindsight, isn't it? I went to Tibet to try and climb Choyu, which is the sixth highest peak in the world.
Yeah.
That was done with the intention of going back to Everest the following year, getting an 8,000 metre under my belt, just to almost put that bad experience to bed. But on Cho is really when I had that light bulb moment, when I had that, had it been in my tent on Everest the year before, the tent at base camp, which is, buried under a foot of ice and rock and torn apart, it was like, what would I have left behind? So kind of having a midlife crisis at 21 years old,
Wow, yeah.
It's kind of like, what am I really here for? And that was when I shifted to like UK based stuff. It's like, well, how can I find some stuff close to home that has the same impact and makes a bigger difference? And I guess running has always been my thing. It's the only sport I'm built for. I'm not good at anything else. So I was like, how can I combine that like UK based endurance with obviously charity and endurance? And I'm always keen to do something different, like what hasn't been done before. Trying to break records, trying to do stuff that's big enough that's going to raise a lot of money. So I came up with Climb the UK, which was a kind of a human-powered 5,000 mile cycle, walk, run, kayak around the UK to the highest point of all 100 counties in the fastest time. And that became my new Everest, because that was a challenge where actually it depended not on avalanches or weather or Sherpa strikes, but just my ability to keep on going and to deal with that. That brought so many things, but the main opportunity from that was then the charity. So Mine Over Mountains was inspired off the back of that, where I got contacted by a company called Adventure Uncovered, who wanted to do an event around the outdoors and mental health and hill walking, and they wanted like an ambassador to lead it. So having heard about my challenge that year and all the money I'd raised for Young Minds, they wanted to kind of get me involved. So together we built this weekend retreat, and I brought in Chris, who was one of my first mentors and coaches, and we built this like combination of hill walking, coaching, counselling, mindfulness, and inspirational speakers, because we all know that getting outside is good, but it's like, how do you sustain that? So kind of came up with this concept, and that weekend became the catalyst for starting Mine Over Mountains as a charity. And we've been a charity for nearly 3 years. We now have 8 trustees, 3 paid staff, over 50 freelance staff working for us. We worked with over 300 people last year, and the charity is kind of the legacy that I wanted to leave, but never planned to start so soon.
Yeah.
But for me, the outdoors and nature is my kind of natural health service. It's what keeps me in a good place, and it feels like that is the next step. It's sort of channeling all my challenges and fundraising into that. So yeah, to be honest, now I spend a lot of time speaking about adventures and not as much time doing them, but as we all do, and I think that's where I'm at the moment, is finding the next thing. But ultra running is definitely my passion at the moment.
Yeah. Just going back to your 100 peaks in all the counties, then that to me sounds like a bigger challenge than Everest.
In many ways, it was, and it was probably harder than Everest. Not that I've climbed it to say, but on Everest you spend so much time sat in a tent eating biscuits and playing cards, whereas on climbing the UK it was like every day on my own. Not always on my own, but a lot of it was independent. Getting on the bike, doing 100 miles, walking in the rain, getting off the bike, walking up a hill, getting back on the bike, finishing late, starting early. You're waking up in your tent, you see the forecast, it's forecast torrential rain all day, but you've got no choice but to get on the bike and do 100 miles anyway. Whereas in Everest, there's a lot of downtime. Now, obviously, I can't compare what it would have been like above 8,000 meters in the death zone. But there's that race against time was just relentless. And it was my own time. I'd set the schedule, but I wanted to finish on that. And you got the same injuries and setbacks. I mean, I had a chest infection, I tore a muscle in my quad, I lost a lot of weight. The weather, England has everything. But the best thing about it was the ability for other people to come and be part of it. And that was the real joy of doing UK-based stuff. Because otherwise, you're on the mountain halfway around the world that nobody even has even heard of.
That's it.
And that's now where I've been like, okay, how can I push the boundaries, but close to home.
So how much did you raise on that particular challenge?
I think it was about 25k.
Wow.
I should have raised more really, and now the challenge is I kind of feel like I should have raised more considering the things I've done. I'm not very good at the whole social media content side of things, which I think now is really important. But yeah, I mean, it got me a Pride of Britain award, which I was probably the thing I'm most proud of. And now the challenge is finding something that's equally daft that compels people to support and donate again.
So is there plans afoot with that? Have you got the next big challenge?
It's still in the last couple of years. It's just been more kind of like short one-day wonders, really. So the last thing I did was the Lakes Mears Waters, which is a 105-mile run around the lakes, April 2022. Before that was the Bob Graham Round. The last silly thing was actually 2020 when I ran the National Three Peaks. So most sensible people would drive between them, and that's hard enough. But decided to try and run the whole thing, which is sort of 17 marathons in 9.5 days. That was the hardest physical, mental thing I've ever even attempted, and I finished. I didn't break the record. I missed it by an hour. I think that raised about 11,000. But having done that, I've now pushed the bar even higher, and it's kind of harder to live up to that. So to answer your question, what's next? The biggest challenge is one I hadn't planned for, which has been actually long COVID. So for the last year, I've been kind of battling through that. For a long time, not able to run or train in my usual way, which suddenly you take that toolkit away, you can't just put everything in the box anymore. You've got to deal with it. So in that, I started open water swimming. That was the only thing I could really do without causing a big crash of symptoms. And it's interesting because I've always hated the cold, and I've always hated like deep open water. It freaks you out. You can't see down below you. But being in the Lake District, I'm fortunate to have that on my doorstep. And like everything, you've got to find the opportunity. So the opportunity was I found swimming. So my comeback project this year is the Frog Graham Round, which is basically a swim run challenge combining about 40 miles of running, about 15,000 feet of ascent, and then you swim 2 miles across 4 lakes, carry my whole kit for the duration. So there's no time limit, but only about 150 people have done it so far. So it's still quite a niche challenge. And it's interesting because I think I'm going to struggle to raise money with this because people know that sort of thing is just a day out for me normally. But having a few months ago, I literally had to I started running again, doing 5 times 30-second jogs. It wasn't even that, it was 4 times 30-second jogs, like couch to 5K from the start. To go from, running 60, 70 miles a week and running like sub-3 marathons to literally being beaten by my dad at park run. And running for 30 seconds, because that's all my body could really manage. The challenge is finding something that meets you where you are. And the Frog Graham, combining the running and the swimming, feels like the best way to do that, and hopefully help anybody else in the same journey. There's 2 million people who are affected by this apparently in the UK at the moment. And it's hard for people to understand unless they're there and they've been there, but it has been without a doubt the hardest year of my life.
Oh wow. So in terms of challenges, it's not one I thought that would have been on the forefront. It's your health, and I suppose reminiscent in a way of when you had your injury back when you were training for Everest.
It was interesting because I was talking about this. I was speaking at an event for a school last week, and and when I reflected on that, I've been here before. I've got the toolkit. I've just got to apply the same toolkit again. And like the last time, it's right. Okay, what can I control? What's the opportunity? And keep the hope, keep the faith. Speak to or find other people that have been there, that have got through it, to kind of focus on them. So I didn't find Bear Grylls again, but I found other, other people, other athletes that had been there, that had found their own way through and just followed their process. And you might be like finding the kind of needle in the haystack, as opposed to everybody else that just says, "Oh, just rest, just stop running." That was never an option, And when you've been there before, it's a lot less daunting, I think.
I think that's quite an important message for anybody who's in, though, because you've been there at a young age, and no doubt there will be a lot of young people out there now who are going through a similar thing, or people who are older, who have had a knockback, and people like yourself who crave adventure and outdoors and want to be out there. You hit the nail on the head there. When people say just take a rest and sit back, it goes against your nature. You can't do that. But those little tools there of sort of focusing on the opportunities, what can I do, not dwelling on what you can't do. I think that is a great tool to take away from that. Brilliant. So the Frog Graham round then, when are you doing this?
5th of August is the planned date, but as always with my challenges, when I set the date, that basically means that's going to be the first date, but it's probably going to get pushed back because there's something to go wrong. I'm hoping not. I've got about 6 weeks at the moment, well, 5 weeks to prepare for it. I've ran and swam most of the route now. I ran 28 miles on my birthday a few weeks ago. I have this kind of ritual for a mile per year. So
oh God,
the fitness is, it may backfire as I go, I'll worry about that later. Maybe I switch to kilometres. So I feel in a fairly good place. But the thing is, there's been an element of, people say, oh, looks like you're bouncing back, this kind of magical recovery. And it's not like that at all. People often only see the Instagram highlight reel, and as important as it is, and as much as I try to share the full story, sometimes only people see that. And it's kind of a bit disappointing if people think it's in any way made up, because they don't realise that I might go for a long run, but 2 days later I'm literally struggling to get up the stairs, and I'm covered in joint pain and chest pain and headaches and everything. But on the whole, the box is getting bigger, and I feel like I'm ready to do that now. And it's kind of my style. I don't do things the conventional or the sensible way, because that's not what keeps me alive.
It's not what pushes the buttons, is it?
And people only know what they know, and almost when you've lived an outdoor lifestyle, you've kind of, once you know it, you can't live without that. And only people that live that way will understand. There is nothing quite like it. But the wild swimming was an alternative to running, and that is now in the toolkit. So inevitably, when I get injured again or something else happens, at least I've got something else to turn to. And if we learn anything from the pandemic, we can't have all our eggs in one basket anymore. That's
true. That's definitely a takeaway. Let me go back to the charity then, Mind Over Mountains. So you set the charity up, and it's very successful as it stands. What is it that the charity does for people? What is it that you're actually trying to achieve?
Essentially, we believe that spending time outdoors is the most powerful intervention for our physical and mental health, and that everybody should have access to that. So what we do is we mostly provide day walks and weekend retreats, which combine hill walking with coaching, counselling, mindfulness, and inspirational speakers, giving people a safe space to walk and talk with professional mental health support in amazing places.
Yeah.
And we work with anybody over 18, a wide range of people from all walks of life and different challenges, with or without, a mental health condition, because we all have mental health. Sometimes we all need that time out, that break. And what's different about it is that combination of, not only being outside, but having that professional support to walk and talk with a counsellor or a coach when you're dealing with a massive life change or trauma is really, really powerful, because there's something about being outside that makes it easy to talk. You remove all the eye contact and that kind of nervous and that all the kind of facial expressions, especially for men. And that we've seen it work time and time again. And we now work all over the UK with all walks of life, but we've been doing events a lot with the ambulance service and the blue light services as well. People that have dealt with a lot of trauma, especially in the pandemic. This weekend coming, we're doing a retreat for the police. We're doing something in the lakes this weekend as well, so mixing with general public and the kind of public sector. So that's what we do, and yeah, we've had a busy few years. We went from one event in 2019 to then the pandemic came along and we had to cancel everything. So we scratch our heads together. It's like, okay, well, what can we do? We can't just sit here and do nothing when there's people are isolated and suffering.
And probably at the worst time.
And as a charity, we went to 27 events last year, working with over 300 people. And this year is looking, bigger and busier once again. So the irony of that is, I often say it's like the full-time unpaid job, and it becomes your baby, and you need to nurture that. And in the pandemic, things got so busy that ironically I kind of burnt myself out a bit as well. So it's important to focus on our strengths, and as a leader to be willing to put your hand up and say, okay, this isn't sustainable. So I'm really grateful. We now have built a team. As Ian has said, he joined as our CEO back in February, shares that vision, got the energy to really take this far and wide. And essentially our vision is to create that kind of natural health service for people. And I'm really excited to see where it is in 5 years' time, even 2 years' time. The team right now just live and breathe it, and it's kind of handing it over and supporting them, hopefully by doing daft challenges again. That's where I can make my biggest impact, is doing silly things and getting the message out there.
Fantastic. It sounds absolutely amazing. And like you say, when you think about the pandemic, that's not 2 years off of its lifespan, and it's already doing as well as it is.
If anything, it gave us an opportunity. I think a lot of charities suffered in the pandemic. We just went massive, but it's just sustaining that. That's the important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you've already mentioned one of your books, Icefall. Let's talk about the next one then. So, how did it get on then, Icefall? So you've obviously been you've been mentioned by Bear Grylls, which is brilliant. Did that inspire you to then write the next book, or did you just enjoy writing? Is that your thing?
I've always enjoyed writing, with the stammer, and it's ironic for a speaker, but I've always been able to express myself much better in words because having a stammer always held me back, and still does to an extent. I always prefer writing. So the plan was always to write a book after Everest, but this ended up being a book not the one I wanted to or planned to write. And in some ways, I remember getting an email off my publisher whilst I was still in Nepal. I think it was a Twitter message just saying like, this is going to be an even better story. Wow, we need to capture this, And then we changed the name of the book before I even got home, and straight away my publisher were like really on it, really supportive. Because I thought that was gone as well, like everything, when Everest went pear-shaped twice. First time round was really therapeutic. Actually writing that, getting it all down on paper was a really cathartic process. And again, I had the luxury of being at home and being able to spend 5 months just writing the book, which was really healing, quite kind of part of the recovery as well. And Icefall today is still my favourite book, and it tells the story from childhood, this massive dream, to actually what happens when things don't go to plan. I'd always wanted to keep writing more and more books, and then after Climb the UK, there was then a second book, which is how do you pick yourself up after Everest? You know, how do you rediscover your purpose in life?
Yeah.
And then it was telling the journey of the Climb the UK thing. You know, the people, the places, the journey, the lessons. More of a mental health book. You know, how does the outdoors and mental health kind of work together? So Another Peak came out in 2019. That was endorsed by Mark Beaumont, who's another big hero of mine. So yeah, there's two. I mean, whenever I do another big thing, there'll be a third. Now the thing is, in the space of 3 or 4 years, is just with the charity and with the speaking. Now I don't know when I'm going to find the time to write.
Yeah, you're a busy guy.
Well, everyone's busy, but it's just being busy with the right things, you know, and where can you make the biggest impact? But yeah, that's the story of those two, and I did enjoy writing them. Definitely the first one, and the second one was quite hard because of the mental health side of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think as well the first one, it's like that kind of first album. It's always going to be exciting and shiny, you know. So yeah,
something to be very proud of at such a young age. But again, the life that you've lived thus far, you know, it needs writing down, it needs sharing, because it clearly has parts to it that can help other people. So I think it's important to write those things down and share them, and for people to sort of say, you know, that's an amazing book. Some of the reviews that I've read, particularly on your first book, amazing. It's really, really good reviews.
Thank you.
In fact, Claire was saying she's going to be getting it on the way home.
Well, to get off my site, in fact, I've got some upstairs if you need one. It's cheaper than Amazon.
So let's talk about speaking then, because how you said that sort of come about from your experiences on Everest, and that those stories that haven't been told and shared, and that's just grown, hasn't it? And you know, we're not just talking about local community centre here now, we're talking big talks, TED Talks. How did it grow to that?
Just organically, really. I mean, it was never really planned. Having a stammer, you know, speaking on stage is kind of your worst nightmare. But yeah. I find that I'm much better in front of a big crowd of people than I am on a phone or a one-to-one conversation. Put me in a bar full of strangers, and I'd rather run a mile and put a full fork in my eye. Honestly, that's the thing, is people think confidence is universal, but I'm much more confident on a stage in front of hundreds of people than you know, one-to-one situations. So it kind of just happened. I mean, obviously you get more experience, you get more demand, then you get referred, then you get bigger stages and bigger gigs. And I remember speaking at Cheshire Business Club when I was just before Everest, just the first time. And again, that only happened because I'd emailed them trying to get some sponsorship for the trip. And they said, well, actually, our speakers just pulled out for our next dinner. Now, this is like a really reputable club. They have like prime ministers and like Ran Fine speaking there.
Yeah.
Like an 18-year-old turned up in a suit, not having a clue what he was doing. But I realised I could do it. I got a kick at, I got that real buzz out of doing it. And that particular talk, I remember getting a standing ovation, which is just like phenomenal. So the passion was there. After Everest 2015, it took me, I very nearly binned the whole thing off because there was just so much trauma, trying to relive all that was just too raw at the time, and I just kept getting on stage and getting complete blocks. Like I couldn't speak, the stammer was absolutely worse. And I very nearly just gave up. I was so fed up of turning up on stage and just blocking and not being able to control my speech. But giving up doesn't really sit well with me, and luckily I found my place again. I got back on it. And then I think what shifted was like speaking at an awards event, sort of 2013. I remember getting paid for my first talk, and it's like, oh, this is cool. You get, it's like you can't even comprehend it. Why would somebody pay me to speak? But I remember getting that check in the post and running around the house thinking I'd won the jackpot, because I'm used to working in the kitchen on £5 an hour.
Yeah.
And to actually make a living out of hopefully inspiring people was just the perfect combination.
Yeah.
And then naturally that's just grown and grown and grown and grown. I've had to keep doing stuff. I've had to hopefully get better and improve and practice and invest in coaching, and every talk, learning, getting better, honing the craft. And naturally, as you do that, you get bigger opportunities. You grow to the level of your experience. And nowadays, for the last few years, it's kind of my full-time work. That doesn't mean I'm speaking every day of the week, but you get a few events a month, and mostly in corporate, but still doing a lot of schools, because I think whilst I'm still fairly young, that's really important to do that.
Definitely, yeah.
And also, kids relate to you better when you're kind of their age. You look and sound like them.
Do you go in with like baggy jeans on and a cap backwards and try and look cool?
No, I don't.
I don't think kids do that anymore anyway.
I don't. And you've got to feel authentic. But I like speaking in a suit and tie, but often it's not really me. And yeah, to be able to share experiences in kind of both audiences is great. And I've continued to spend time growing that and developing that and trying to keep doing it. And it's given me some amazing opportunities. I mean, recently I was speaking in Switzerland for a school, and I've spoken to some big corporates around the world, and every time pinching myself, literally pinching myself. And it's the best job in the world. It really is. It comes with the imposter syndrome, the doubt that we all have, and the joys of being freelance, especially in the pandemic.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm unemployable now, so I've got to make it work. And I hope I'm doing it for many years to come.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Because it's, speaking on resilience and mental health and overcoming challenges are relevant to everybody can relate to that in some way, I think.
Yeah. No matter how small that challenge is or how small the adversity may seem, it's their Everest, isn't it? I mean, it's the metaphor, isn't it?
I use that a lot.
Yeah. I think that's important. Last of all, we've got one really important question, which I tend to ask a lot of my guests. What is your favourite snack out on the hills?
I'm going to need a podcast just for this. Blimey. Well, so I'm more of a hill runner now than a walker. I'm in the lakes. Normally, I'm out running and doing stuff and jumping in tarns and waterfalls and everywhere. So I'm often on the go, which obviously dictates what I can eat. One of my favourites, and I'm not sponsored by them, is probably Sorry Malt Loaf.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's the most universal, both for running and hill walking, super high energy, no mess, doesn't go off, you squidge it into anywhere. Some of that with peanut butter on in a pack is just the perfect hill or running food for us. Yeah. Saurine is, you can't go wrong, but I think every hill day, every adventure starts with porridge, even in summer. That's my kind of staple.
That's good.
Not on the hill. But yeah, I'd say Saurine is definitely a regular go-to, and I'll stop there before I start listing off other things. But I tend to go kind of minimal faff. I'm not one of these that sits down on the hill with a salad or a fancy sandwich. I'm just kind of on the go. Yeah. Saurine, and if I had to say anything else, probably like Scottish fudge tablet. When I was cycling around the UK, that fudge tablet got me around the place because it's super high energy, super high carbs. And yeah, it's the list could go on.
We're going to add these to our list because it's when we ask people, we just keep a note of that, and we'll take them all out and just
What's the weirdest you've had?
Mackerel rolls.
I love mackerel. I love fish, but not on a hill. Please, why?
You heard that there, Robin?
Sorry. Well, don't like anything till you've tried it. But I mean, yeah, I love mackerel and fish.
Yeah.
But the weirdest thing I've seen was on Ben Nevis. I was climbing the Conmore Derra Garrett with a guide a few years ago, and his lunch was just a block of cheese, just a block of cheddar cheese. It's at the end of the day, your body just needs calories. And it's just block of cheese. So.
And it's easy to take with you.
Absolutely.
Unless it's a sweaty cheese, you don't want that, do you? Right. Lastly, then, how can people follow you and what you do, and Mind Over Mountains as well? What's the best place to sort of keep in touch with what you're doing?
I'd love to hear from people. I think, firstly, most importantly for the charity, if anybody wants to find out more, if anybody wants to, perhaps, attend our events, if you know somebody that maybe needs that support, we have bursaries available as well, which is really important to say. So if anybody's in financial hardship, they can attend. Visit our website, mindovermountains.org.uk. And for me personally, I mean, if you want to follow the next disasters, adventures, I'm on all the normal places on social media. So Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Strava. I share quite a lot on there. And just to say, really, I mean, my mentors and coaches have always given me their time for nothing, but on the condition that I pay it forward. So if anybody has another big goal that I can help with, then I'd love to hear from them. Please do feel free to contact me if you've enjoyed the episode and if I can help. So yeah, on social media, on my website, alexstaniforth.com, and my books are available on there as well if you want signed copies.
Excellent, yeah, and I'll share those in the show notes as always. But thank you very much for your time, and it's been absolutely fantastic chatting to you.
No, it's been fun, and thank you for having me. Thank you.
It was absolutely fantastic meeting up with Alex and hearing about his adventures so far. What an inspirational person. I really hope that you can take some inspiration from that. Please have a look at his books and some of the other work that he's getting up to. The link is in the show notes just below. Now, with the new series of Summit to Talk About, we've actually launched a new supporters page as well. So before we had the Patreon page, we have now revamped that, and we have now introduced fortnightly bonus episodes known as Summit Else or Brew with a View, where Claire and I will go out and have a brew in the outdoors, hopefully somewhere weather dependent of course, and we will just chat about this, that and everything in between. So come on over to the Patreon page, pledge the £5 per month for that, and that will get you the bonus episodes as well as some stickers sent through the post as well, some Summit Else and Summit to Talk About merchandise. So please come on over and join us. Every penny that you pledge towards the podcast goes back into being able to produce each and every episode that we bring to you, and getting out and about to meet those guests to do so. That is everything for this episode. Thank you all very much for tuning in and watching. Keep putting one foot in front of the other, and we'll see you in the next one.